Hello, this is Mav and welcome to my YouTube channel. So today I wanted to talk about something that a lot of people ask me, which is what books do you recommend? What are your book recommendations? What books should I read to learn more about the brain and whatnot? So you asked, I want to deliver, and I have 5 different books that I absolutely adore. I feel like each of these books are incredibly insightful, but also very easy to understand and allow for accessibility of pretty complex topics that if you look at different research articles and papers and whatnot, sometimes they can be incredibly difficult to understand and digest, but these books do a fantastic job of explaining things in a way that is decently understandable. So absolutely love these books, and I highly recommend you give these books a read or at least listen to the audiobook or something like that. And I really hope that you enjoy these recommendations as much as I enjoy them. So yeah, without further ado, let's get started. The first book that I have for you, and this is a book that I thought was so fascinating when I read it, but it's Why We Sleep by neuroscientist and sleep expert Matthew Walker. And in this book, it talks about how sleep is the foundation of emotional stability, mental clarity, physical health, and long-term success as well. It talks about how sleep is a non-negotiable biological necessity that affects every system in the body, essentially. And it talks about the health implications of chronic sleep deprivation, the effects of cognitive function based on how much sleep you get, and then also modern disruptors of sleep, such as caffeine or alcohol or blue light and screens. And it also talks about REM sleep quite a bit too. And overall, if you want to learn more about sleep and the benefits as well as the implications of not getting enough sleep, I highly recommend this book because I thought that this was such a fascinating read. And as soon as I learned about all of the different health implications and all of the different effects on cognitive function and everything, I was like, wow, I didn't know that sleep was so important. And it also talks about the myth of being able to run on 6 hours of sleep or even less and be okay with it. Because even though your body and your brain may adapt to that level of sleep, because that's the level of sleep that you are allowing it, that's not necessarily meaning that you are thriving on that level of sleep. So this is definitely a read that I think is incredibly interesting, and since everyone is affected by sleep, this is something that I highly recommend you give a read. Second book, and this is a book that I thought was so interesting because there are many case studies involved, but this is The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat by neurologist Oliver Sacks. And this is quite well known, but this book has, again, case studies of how neurological disorders reshape identity, perspective, and meaning. And it's written in a very compassionate and narrative style, while it blends with scientific explanation to make all of these complex neurology topics more accessible and understandable. So I thought that this was an incredibly interesting read because you were able to actually see how neurological disorders affected different people. So this was a read that I personally thought was incredibly insightful and had a lot of fun reading, so hopefully you do as well. The third book, and this book is honestly a great book if you want to get into neuroscience or honestly anything that has to do with the brain, because it goes over a lot of different topics, but this is The Brain, The Story of You by neuroscientist David Eagleman, and it talks about how the brain makes decisions, mostly unconsciously, how we perceive the world as our brain interprets it. It talks about honestly so much. And the overall big theme is that essentially this book tells you how learning about the brain helps you with understanding why you behave in the ways you do and how you can change that. If you're interested in learning more about the brain, highly recommend. This gives you a very good introduction into more about the brain. So yes, very much recommend this. The fourth book that I recommend is The Brain That Changes Itself by psychiatrist and psychoanalyst Norman Deutsch. The book delves into neuroplasticity, how repetition strengthens neural pathways, how plasticity works for good and bad habits, and honestly much more. It also talks about how habits, behaviors, thoughts, all of that literally reshapes your brain structure. So this was something that I thought was incredibly fascinating. If you want to learn more about neuroplasticity, how your brain is able to strengthen neural pathways and all of that, this is an incredibly fascinating read. And I also thought it was really funny because Oliver Sacks has something about George's book, because it says fascinating. George's book is a remarkable and hopeful portrait of the endless adaptability of the human brain, and Oliver Sacks is another recommendation that I have here. So I thought it was interesting how another author of a book that I was reading commented on a book from the author that I was reading. So yeah, I thought that was really funny. Anyway, the last book that I recommend is Algorithms to Live by author Brian Christian and cognitive scientist Tom Griffiths. And I thought that this was a really interesting book because it shows the insights of computer algorithms and how it can help the human mind and common decision-making problems. And the authors balance technical depth with very accessible explanations on things and a lot of practical advice as well, which I appreciate. They also use stories and thought experiences rather than complex equations. So even though it has two very complex topics, they are able to explain things in a way that is not too complex. It is quite accessible, as I've said. And I just thought it was really interesting how the same algorithms that optimize computers can help with humans making better life decisions. So this was a read that I thought was incredibly interesting. And with each chapter, they talk about an algorithm. So highly recommend if you are into tech as well as the brain. Someone such as myself would enjoy this book. So yeah, this is just a recommendation that I personally enjoyed. And if you like learning about tech as well as the brain, it's a really fun read. So I highly recommend it. So yeah, that's a very, very simple overview of all of these books. But I thought that all of them were incredibly interesting. Hopefully you found one a little bit interesting, something that piqued your interest a little bit, made you want to go buy it or something and learn more about it. But let me know if you do decide to read it, and let me know your thoughts. I want to know, because I personally thought all of these were in their own way so incredibly insightful, and I tried very hard not to ramble about them because obviously if I wanted to, I could a lot, but I didn't want to do that to you. So yeah, hope you enjoyed these book recommendations, and give them a read if you'd like. Let me know what you think. So yeah.